The stranger at the kitchen door had stood in the rain long enough that the water no longer ran off him, but had begun to sit in his clothes. And still Mr. Pryke would not let him past the step. Susanna Heath saw it from the scullery passage, and stopped with her bucket in her hand. The man was big and gone gaunt. His skin burned the deep brown of someone who had laboured for years under a harder sun than England's. A ragged beard hid half his face, and his sandy hair was plastered dark by the rain. He had asked only for work, she gathered, or failing work a crust, and a dry corner of the stable. Pryke had refused him every part of it. Pryke was the steward's man, and he ran the lower house like a small, unpleasant kingdom. The kitchen maid had been about to hand the stranger the heel of a loaf, when Pryke took it from her and threw it to the yard dogs, while the man watched. Yardwood did not feed every piece of foreign rubbish the road washed up, he said pleasantly. His Grace's house had standards. The man might be grateful he was not set upon by the dogs as well. The footman thought this very fine. The stranger said nothing. He looked at the bread in the mud, and then at Mr. Pryke, with a steadiness that ought to have warned a wiser man. Then he turned to go back into the dark and the wet with nothing in his hands. That was the moment Susanna set down her bucket. She had a slice of cold mutton and a wedge of bread in her apron pocket, saved from her own dinner against the long evening. And she was out the side door and across the streaming yard before she had decided anything at all. She put the food into the stranger's wet hands and folded his fingers over it. "There is a dry corner in the old tack room, over the far stable," she said, low, so Pryke would not hear. "The grooms keep a brazier there, and no one goes near it after dark. You are welcome to it, and to say nothing of who told you." The stranger looked down at her. His eyes, in the lantern light from the door, were a clear, cool grey, and there was something in them she could not read. It was not the gratitude of a beaten man. "Why?" he said. The voice was rougher than gentry, but it was not quite a labourer's voice either, and the question had a real weight to it, as though he genuinely wished to know, and her answer would matter. "Because you are wet and hungry, and there is no other reason needed than that," Susanna said. "Go on now, before Pryke comes round." She went back into the warm and the noise, and thought no more of it, except to be ashamed of her household, which she was often. She did not know that she had just fed the Duke of Yardwood at his own door, or that she had given him the only kindness his own house had shown him in the 3 days since he had walked back onto his own land. It is worth understanding what Yardwood had become, because the whole of what followed grew out of it, the cruelty and the kindness both. Gabriel, 6th Duke of Yardwood, had gone abroad as a young man and stayed abroad 11 years. He had come into the title at 23, on the sudden death of his elder brother, and the inheritance had arrived, wrapped in a quarrel, and a death he could not bear to be near. So he had taken a commission, and then a post in a far country, and put oceans between himself and the house. He left Yardwood in other hands, and told himself year on year that they wrote him the estate did well, that the rents came in, that a man could mourn as easily a long way off as near. He had been wrong about all of it. Only in the last year abroad had he begun to learn how wrong, when letters reached him that were not in the steward's smooth hand and told a very different tale. So he had come home quietly, to see the truth for himself before he announced anything. A duke who sends word ahead sees only what they wish him to see. A ragged stranger at the kitchen door sees everything. The truth was that the estate was being eaten alive. Veronica, Dowager Duchess of Yardwood, had been a poor gentleman's daughter with a beautiful face and a horror of poverty, and she had married Gabriel's brother for the rank. Widowed young, and left mistress of the house in the new duke's long absence, she had made herself Queen of Yardwood in all but name. She kept the state of a reigning duchess on an income that was not hers, filled the good rooms with fashionable guests, and ordered gowns from town by the carriage load. She had not the smallest intention of giving any of it up to a brother-in-law she had persuaded herself was never coming back. Her instrument was Mr. Sorrel, the steward, a careful grey man who had begun as an honest clerk. Somewhere in 11 unwatched years, he had discovered how very much could be moved, quietly, from the estate's pocket to his own. Between them, Veronica and Sorrel had bled Yardwood white. The rents were screwed up past what the land could bear, and the surplus vanished into the steward's books and the dowager's accounts. Tenants who fell behind were turned out without mercy. The household was run hard and cheap below stairs, while the staterooms blazed. One by one, the old servants had been pushed out. The men who remembered another Yardwood, pensioned at nothing or simply dismissed, until almost no one was left who could measure the present house against the past and find it wanting. Almost no one. There was still old Jonas. He had been head gardener under the 4th Duke, and he had taught the 5th and the 6th their first knots and grafts when they were small boys with dirty knees. He was too old now to be much use and too stubborn to go, and Sorrel suffered him to stay in his cottage only because turning out so old and known a servant would have made talk. The gardens Jonas had kept like a psalm had gone to nettle and ruin under the new economy, and he grieved them the way a man grieves a friend. He said so too loud and too often, which had made him an enemy he was far too old to afford. And there was Susanna Heath, housemaid, 22, the daughter of a curate dead of a fever, and a mother dead of the workhouse cold. She had come to Yardwood at 14 with nothing, and through 8 hard years she had kept the one thing the house could not take from her: the habit of treating every living soul as though they mattered. Her father had taught her that they did, and she had never found the argument against it. She was not soft. She had a level grey gaze and a tongue that could be dry, and she had learned exactly how much defiance a maid could afford, and spent it carefully. But she fed old Jonas from her own plate when Sorrel cut the garden allowance, and she stood between the youngest scullery girls and Mr. Pryke's temper, and she had fed a starving stranger in the rain because he was hungry. These were the small treasons by which she kept her soul her own. To be a maid at Yardwood in those days was to live in 2 houses at once. Below stairs, the economy was savage. The fires small and lit late, the candles tallow and counted. The servants' meat the great table would not have, and never quite enough of it. Above stairs, there was no economy at all. Carrying a tray out of the cold, mean passages, Susanna would pass into a warmth and a glitter that made her blink, where the wax candles burned by the dozen, and the wine went round, and the talk was all of town. The contrast was a lesson the house taught her every day. There was plenty at Yardwood, a very great plenty, and the only question ever asked of it was whose comfort it should buy. The answer was never the people who did the work. The dowager herself Susanna saw seldom, which was as Veronica wished it. She was a beautiful woman still, with a face like something carved cool out of marble, and a manner to match, and she moved through her stolen kingdom as though she had been born to it, which she had not. Once Susanna saw the carved face crack. She was laying the fire in the small drawing room one evening when the dowager came in early, and a footman following her spilled a single drop of wine on a gown that had cost, the household whispered, more than a labourer earned in 2 years. The dowager did not raise her voice. She turned to the boy, a lad of 15, and told him in a tone of pleasant ice that he was a clumsy nothing got up in a good coat. She could not think, she said, why she suffered such creatures about her. He might consider whether the coat would not fit a cleverer boy better. That was all. No blow, no shout. But Susanna, kneeling at the grate, saw the boy's hands shake for an hour afterward, and she understood the true currency of Yardwood. It was this pleasant, bloodless cruelty that left no mark and took everything, dealt out the way other women dealt in card debts, lightly and daily, and without ever feeling the weight of what it spent. It was a house, in short, where a kindness was so far out of the common run that people remembered it when one was done. Which is why what Susanna did at the kitchen door did not stay the small private thing she had meant it for. It was seen, and it was marked, and not only by the man she did it to. The stranger took the tack room, and by morning he had taken work as well. He presented himself at the stable in the grey dawn, dry now and steady, and offered himself to the head groom as a man who knew horses and would labour for his keep and a few shillings. The head groom, short-handed because Sorrel would pay for no proper staff, took him on without troubling the steward. And so the Duke of Yardwood became a hired hand on his own estate, under the name of Gabriel, which was his own Christian name, and meant nothing to anyone there. A name for a labouring man, and no more. Susanna noticed him after that, the way one notices a stone in a familiar field that was not there before. He was a good worker, and quiet, and the grooms liked him. But there were things about him that did not sit flush with the rest. He spoke to the horses in 2 languages, one of them neither English nor, she thought, French. He carried himself, when he forgot to stoop, like a man used to being deferred to. And he knew the house. More than once she caught him pausing in a passage, as though he expected a door where a door had plainly once been and was now bricked up. Or she would see him glance at a bare wall with a small flicker of something, as if a picture that belonged there had been taken down. His hands, for all the hard use on them, were not a born labourer's hands. She told herself it was no business of hers. A great many people came to service with a history they did not care to tell, and the kind thing, the thing she would have wished for herself, was to let a man keep his secrets and judge him only by how he behaved. By how he behaved, Gabriel was the most courteous man at Yardwood, above stairs or below. What she could not have told herself, because she did not know it, was that he watched her. Not in the way the footman watched the maids, which she knew how to freeze at 20 paces. He watched her the way a man watches a fire he had thought long out, and finds, against all expectation, still burning in the grate. She came to know him a little over those weeks, in the way servants come to know one another, in the margins of the work. He had been set to mending the long wall of the kitchen garden, which had gone to ruin like everything Jonas could no longer tend. And her duties carried her past it morning and evening. A word grew into two, and then into the short, real exchanges of people who would rather talk to each other than to anyone else. He asked her about the house, always the house, and she took it at first for an outsider's curiosity. Who had hung the bare hooks in the long gallery? What had stood in the empty plinths along the drive, when the lime walk had been let go? She answered what little she knew, most of it before her time, and she noticed that her answers seemed to cost him something, that he took each small account of neglect with a stillness which was not idle interest at all. What truly turned her was not the mystery of him, but a small thing she saw him do. There was a stable boy of about 10, an orphan kept on for the rough work, whom the older grooms bullied, and the kitchen fed last and least. One grey noon, she came round the corner of the tack room, and found the new man, Gabriel, sitting on an upturned pail, sharing out his own midday bread and cheese with the boy, half and half, plainly and without fuss. He was not making a show of it. He did not know she was there. He was only listening to the child talk, asking a question now and then, treating the boy's small troubles as worth a grown man's attention. It was exactly the thing she did herself, and had never once seen another servant do. She went away quietly before he saw her, and thought about it the rest of the day. A man might counterfeit good manners, she knew. He could not counterfeit that, not when he believed no one was watching, and there was nothing to be gained. After that, she stopped wondering quite so much who he had been, and began, without meaning to like very much who he was. Once his guard slipped outright, and she caught it. A boy came running with word that a carriage horse had cast a shoe 2 miles off on the London road, and the head groom was away, and there was a flurry over who should go. Into it the new man Gabriel said, quietly and without thinking, "Send Marsh on the grey, and have the Crawford Forge warned we are coming. Their man is quicker than ours." Then he stopped. A labourer 3 weeks at Yardwood could not know the undergrooms by name, nor which forge in the district was the better, nor speak in that flat, certain voice that arranges a thing and expects it done. There was a small silence, and the grooms stared, and Gabriel passed a hand over his beard, and muttered that he had heard the names about the yard, and bent again to his wall. The moment closed over. But Susanna had seen it, and it joined the bricked door and the bare wall, and the 2 languages and the hands. She carried the growing weight of it about with her, and did not know what to do with it. And she told no one, because telling would have been its own kind of unkindness to a man who plainly wished to be let alone. She decided, in the end, that whoever he had been brought low by some trouble or some grief. The decent thing was to leave him his disguise, and to offer him instead the only thing she had to offer anyone, to be treated as though he mattered. She did not guess the truth, for the truth was too large to guess. But she guarded his secret without knowing what it was, and that, though she could not have known it either, was the very thing teaching the man behind the secret that he could not let her go. The kindnesses went on, because they were simply how she was made, and he saw everyone. He saw her carry old Jonas's dinner out to the garden cottage in the evenings, and sit with him while he ate, letting him talk about the dead dukes and the lost roses, never once letting the old man see she had heard it 40 times. He saw her take the blame, calmly for a broken dish the little kitchen maid had dropped, because the maid was new and frightened of Pryke, and Susanna was neither. And he saw what she did the worst night of that autumn, the night the Hartleys were turned off. The Hartleys had held a farm at the far edge of the estate for 30 years, the man and his father before him, and they had fallen behind because Sorrel had raised their rent twice in 2 seasons, past anything the thin land could yield. On a black night, with the first hard frost in it, the steward's men put them off, the whole family, with what they could carry, into the dark. The wife found her way to the yardwood kitchen door near midnight, because she had nowhere else, and 3 children with her. The youngest blue with the cold. She stood there shaking and begged. Not for charity, she kept saying. Not charity. Only an hour by a fire to warm the baby before they walked on to her sister's 12 miles off. Mr. Pryke would have shut the door on her, and had begun to, with a few smooth words about the steward's orders. Then Susanna came through from the scullery, took in the whole of it in a breath, and did the unforgivable thing. She opened the door wider. She brought the woman and the 3 children into the still room, the warmest place she could reach unseen, built up the fire with her own hands, and put the frozen baby almost into the hearth. She fetched bread and milk and what cold meat there was, and wrapped the children in her own blankets, brought down from the attic. Pryke hissed at her elbow the whole while that she would answer for this, that he would carry it to Mr. Sorrel in the morning, that she had lost her wits. Susanna straightened from the hearth and looked at him. She was not a large woman, and he was a head taller, but something in her face stopped the words in his throat. "Carry it where you like," she said, low and even. "Tell Mr. Sorrel a maid gave 3 half-frozen children an hour by a fire, on a night the water froze in the jugs. Tell him, and then explain to the parish, if one of these children is found dead in a ditch come morning, that you had a warm house with 40 empty beds, and turned them out of it to spare the cost of a fire. You do that, Mr. Pryke. I will stand by every word." Pryke was a bully, and therefore a coward. He could see where the blame would land if a child died after being refused at the Duke's own door, and he backed down rather than carry it up. He went away muttering, and left her the field. The Hartleys slept warm in the still room that night, and were gone by first light, before the house woke, and Susanna never learned what became of them. It was one of the small, unfinished griefs she carried, that she had been able to give an hour, and not a life. It was that night the stranger spoke to her as more than a passing word. She had come out to the yard near midnight, worn through, to draw a breath of cold air before she dropped, and he was there in the dark by the stable, not working, only standing. She had the sense she had interrupted something private, and made to go in, but he spoke first. "That woman you took in," he said. "The tenant's wife. Where will they go?" "I don't know. Nowhere good," Susanna said. "The man held that farm 30 years, and his father before him. It is hard land, but they made it pay, near enough, until the rent was put up past paying, twice in 2 years. Now they are on the road with 3 children, and the winter coming." She heard her own bitterness, and reined it in. "It is not my place to say so. Say it to me. It is safe with me." There was that weight again, that strange, real attention. "Who's doing? The rents?" "Mr. Sorrel's? The steward's." She studied him in the dark. "You ask a great many questions, for a man 3 weeks at his work." He was silent a moment, and when he spoke, his rough voice had changed, gone low and careful, as if he set each word down on uncertain ground. I had a place once, people in my charge. I was responsible for them, and I went away, for reasons that seemed good to me, and I left them to other men. I told myself those other men would do right by them, because that was easier to believe than to come back and look. They did not do right by them. By the time I understood that, a great deal of harm was done. Harm I might have stopped if I had been there to stop it. Only I had preferred my own grief to my own duty. He stopped, no longer looking at her, but at the dark bulk of the great house, where the dowager's windows still burned gold and wasteful. I am ashamed of it, more than I have ever been ashamed of anything. I tell you, because you took a stranger in tonight, at cost to yourself, and I have not seen that done in a long while. It seems you ought to know there are men who knew better and did worse. Susanna did not understand the half of it then. She thought he spoke of some master he had served, some estate abroad, some failure of his own among the foreign places that had browned his skin. But she heard the grief in it, plain and deep, and she answered the grief, and not the riddle. Whatever you left undone, you are not undoing it, standing in a wet yard, hating yourself, she said. That meant nothing. If you wronged people, the only thing worth a farthing is to go back and set it right, however late, and bear what they say to you when you do. The rest is just a man enjoying his own guilt, because it is cheaper than the work. She had not meant to say so much. Forgive me. My father was a clergyman. It comes out. He looked at her a long moment in the dark, and something moved in his weathered face that she could not name. No, don't beg my pardon, he said. You may be the only honest voice in this whole house. He wished her good night, and she went in and lay awake longer than her tiredness should have allowed, thinking about a hired man who talked of duty like a lord, and looked at the great house as though it had broken his heart. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. After that, the autumn tightened, and the trouble that had been gathering over Yardwood for 11 years came on at last, all in a rush, the way a slope that has been slipping by inches finally goes. She saw the shape of it most plainly on the rent day. Twice a year the tenants came up to the estate office to pay, and Susanna, sent across the yard with a tray, had to pass the long line of them waiting in the cold. She had never before looked at that line as anything but part of the furniture of the season, but this time she looked. They were frightened men, every one, turning their hats in their hands, and she understood, watching, that they had reason. Through the office window, she could see Mr. Sorrel at his table with 2 ledgers, a fat one open and a thin one closed at his elbow. And she had the wit now to wonder why a man needed 2 books to set down one set of sums. She watched him take a farmer's money and write a figure in the open book, and she was near enough through the cracked window to hear the farmer say, "Lo, that it was more than last year, and more than the land had borne." Sorrel answered in his pleasant grey voice that the rent was the rent, and that a man who could not meet it was welcome to give up his holding to one who could, since there were 3 families, would take it tomorrow at the figure. Both of them knew that last for a lie meant only to close the man's mouth. The farmer paid. They all paid, or signed the paper that said they would, and went out past Susanna with the particular grey look of people being slowly squeezed dry by someone they cannot reach. She carried her tray on, and the thing that had been forming in her for weeks finally settled. Yardwood was not merely a hard house, but a robbed one, and the robbing wore a steward's coat and smiled, and somewhere above it the dowager's candles burned by the dozen on money screwed out of frightened men in a cold yard. She did not yet know how to prove a word of it, but she had stopped being able to tell herself it was none of her affair. For Susanna, it came home with old Jonas. Word ran round below stairs that the steward meant at last to be rid of him. The pretext was the cottage. Sorrel had a new underkeeper he wished to house there, a younger and stronger man, and the old gardener's cottage was the only one going, and Jonas paid no rent and did no work the books could see. He was an expense the estate would no longer carry, and he was to be out by the quarter day. Where an unpensioned man of 70-odd was to go in November, the notice did not trouble to say. The workhouse was the answer everyone knew, and no one spoke. Susanna went to the steward. It was a mad thing for a housemaid to do, and she knew it, and she did it anyway because she could not sit still under it. She caught Mr. Sorrel in the estate passage, his ledgers under his arm, and put the case to him plainly. Jonas had given 50 years to Yardwood. The old Duke would never have turned him out. There were 3 empty cottages on the home farm the underkeeper might have instead. To put a man of his age on the road in winter was as good as killing him, and the parish would talk. Sorrel heard her out with the patience of a man who holds all the cards and enjoys being asked. Then he told her, pleasantly, that the management of the estate was not the affair of housemaids, that she had already been noted as insubordinate, the business of the turned-off tenant's wife having reached him, and that Yardwood could find another housemaid more easily than another excuse for her impudence. If she valued her place and her character, he said, she would go back to her work and learn to mind it. He smiled when he said character, and let the word sit. She understood the threat exactly. A maid turned off without a character could get no other place, and might starve or worse. He was telling her that her kindness had a price, and that he held the bill. She went back to her work, but she did not let it go, and that was the second of the decisions that drove everything after. She went where she had never dared go before, to the one person at Yardwood who outranked even the dowager, and had been treated almost as badly as the servants. Old Lady Cornelia was the late Duke's aunt, a tiny, fierce woman of near 90. She lived in 2 rooms of the east wing, wheeled out for show on the rare grand occasions, and otherwise left alone. Her allowance cut to nothing, and her letters, she said, gone astray more often than not. The household treated her as a harmless old relic. The friendship between them had begun the winter before, over a scuttle of coal. Susanna had been sent up to the east wing with the old lady's allowance of fuel, which Sorrel had cut to a single scuttle a day, not enough to keep one room warm through a hard night, let alone 2. She had found the Duke's great-aunt sitting bolt upright in a cold room in 3 shawls, too proud to complain, and too clever not to know exactly who was starving her of warmth and why. After that, Susanna took to carrying up a second scuttle in the evenings, slipped past Pryke under her apron, with a better candle, when she could come by 1 and an hour of her own scarce rest to sit and feed the fire and listen. She had expected to pity a poor failing old woman. She found instead the sharpest mind at Yardwood. Here was a woman who had seen 70 years of the family's history and forgotten none of it, who spoke of the dead dukes as if they had stepped out of the room a moment before. She watched the present management with a cold, furious clarity that missed nothing and could do nothing, which is the particular hell reserved for the old. "They think me a piece of the furniture," Lady Cornelia had said one such evening, her black eyes glittering over the new flames. "A relic to be dusted and wheeled out when company comes, and shut away the rest. It suits them that I am thought simple. A simple old woman's letters may go astray, and no one asks why. A simple old woman may be told her nephew never writes, and never told that perhaps her nephew never receives. I am not simple, child. I am only old, which everyone mistakes for the same thing, to their cost one day, I hope." She had looked at Susanna a long, measuring moment. "You are not a fool either, whatever the cap on your head would have them think. We are a pair. Come up tomorrow." So Susanna had come up tomorrow, and many tomorrows after, and the maid with no people, and the old lady whose people had been taken from her, made between them a small, warm country of 2 rooms in a cold house. It was the nearest thing to family either of them had. And it was why, when the blow over Jonas fell, and there was nowhere else on earth to turn, Susanna climbed the east wing stair again, and found the old lady waiting, as if she had known she would come. The old woman listened, her clawed hands tight on her stick, and when Susanna had done, she was silent a while. Then she said a thing that turned the whole world on its hinge. "They are afraid," said Lady Cornelia. "Mark it, child. Sorrel does not turn out a harmless old gardener for the cost of his bread. He turns him out because Jonas remembers, and because Jonas talks, and because someone may be coming at last who will listen to what Jonas remembers." Her black eyes glittered. "My nephew is coming home. Gabriel, the Duke. I have written him these 3 years that this house is being robbed, written him everything, and had no answer, not one, and I had begun to think him as careless as they say. But a letter came to me last month, in a hand I did not know, brought round by a friend in town to slip past Sorrel's fingers, for Sorrel reads my letters, child, in and out, and has done for years. My nephew wrote that he had received word at last of how things stood, that he was coming, and that I was to trust no one and say nothing and wait. So I have waited." She fixed Susanna with a look. "And now, the very season he is to come, the steward is in a sudden hurry to be rid of every old mouth that might tell the truth, to tidy his books, and to turn off any servant grown too honest. Such as you. You have made yourself dangerous, my dear, by the simple act of being decent in a house built on the opposite. Have a care. They will sweep you out with the rest of the evidence." Susanna sat very still, and pieces she had not known were pieces began, quietly, to fit. The hired man who knew the house, who spoke of a place he had abandoned and meant to set right, who had asked in the dark exactly whose doing the rents were, who watched the great house as though it had broken his heart. She told herself she was being a fool, that a duke did not come home to muck out his own stables in a dead man's coat. But the thought, once it had come, would not be sent away, and she found she was afraid, and under the fear, absurdly, something that felt almost like hope. She went down that evening to old Jonas, to tell him gently that the cottage was lost, and that she would not let him face it alone. She found him among the ruin of his roses in the failing light, the beds he had kept like a psalm for 50 years, gone to bramble and dock. He was not weeping over the notice, as she had feared, but pruning, slow and stubborn, a single rose that had survived the neglect, as though the parish and the steward and the whole cold house were no concern of his beside the urgent business of one living plant. "They mean to put you out, Jonas," she said. "Tomorrow. I'm so sorry. I went to Sorrel. I went to her ladyship. I could not turn it." "I know it, lass." He did not stop his work. "Let them. A man my age. What is a roof, more or less?" He snipped a dead cane. "I have been thinking of the boys these days. The old Duke's boys. I taught them this, you know, both of them, to take a rose down hard in the autumn so it comes back strong in the spring. The elder had no patience for it. All fire, gone too soon, poor lad. But the younger..." His seamed face softened in the dusk. Master Gabriel. He had the hands for it. A quiet boy, watchful, those grey eyes on everything, and he never said the half of what he saw. They sent him away, or he sent himself, after the bad business with his brother. And the house has not been a house since, only a great cold purse for that woman to spend. He sighed. "I dream of him come back sometimes. Foolishness. An old man's dreaming. He'll not come now, and if he did, he would not know me, nor I him, after all these years." Susanna stood very still in the wrecked garden, the hair rising on her arms. She was thinking of a hired man with quiet grey eyes, who watched everything and said the half of nothing, who knew this house in his bones, who had spoken in the dark of a place he loved and abandoned and meant, however late, to set right. She opened her mouth and shut it again. She had no proof. She had only a wild idea too large to say aloud, and a frightened old man with a notice to quit, and she would not raise in him a hope she could not keep. So she only took the shears gently from his stiff hands, and finished the rose for him while he watched, saw him settled, and went back to the house with her heart going hard. She barely slept that night. She did not get the chance to test the idea gently, because events would not wait. The blow fell on a grey morning near the quarter day, and it fell on two fronts at once, for the dowager and her steward had decided to clear the ground before his Grace's expected arrival, and to do it in a single stroke. Old Jonas was served his notice to quit the cottage the next day, and Susanna was dismissed. She was called to the housekeeper's room, and told by Mr. Pryke, with the steward standing by, that her services were no longer required, that she had shown a persistent, insubordinate spirit unsuited to a great house, and that she would be gone by morning. When she asked, with a calm she was proud of afterward, for her character, the written reference without which she could not hope for another place, Mr. Sorrel answered, with his grey smile, that in the circumstances no character could honestly be given, that she had brought it on herself, and that he hoped the lesson would be of use to her in whatever life now remained to her. He meant her to be ruined. He meant her on the road, like the tenant's wife, like old Jonas, an honest mouth swept out before the master came. It was, in its quiet way, the cruelest thing that had ever been done to her, and it was done pleasantly, with a smile, which was how cruelty was always done at Yardwood. She did not weep in front of them. She went out, packed her small box, and meant to find Jonas, so that the two of them at least might face the road together. She came down into the great hall in the grey morning light to wait for him, and the whole bad business came to its head there, in the hall, before them all. The dowager was in the hall, in her travelling finery, with Sorrel beside her, and Pryke, and a knot of upper servants. Old Jonas had been fetched down too, to be put off the premises, that very hour, rather than wait the day. The dowager had decided, on reflection, that she would have both the troublesome old man and the troublesome maid gone before any chance of his grace arriving to a house with complaints still in it. So they were assembled, the powerful and the cast off, under the cold portraits of the Dukes of Yardwood, when the hired man, Gabriel, walked in from the yard in his stained coat, where no labourer had any business to be. He did not stop at the door, and he did not bow. "You will not turn either of them out," he said. The voice carried. It was not loud, but it was the voice of a man who had given orders under fire, and never once doubted they would be obeyed, and it fell on the bickering hall like a dropped stone. Everyone turned. Mr. Pryke recovered first, and started forward, purpling, to have the insolent stableman thrown out. But the dowager's voice cut him off. Veronica had gone very still, staring at the ragged man with a dawning, dreadful uncertainty, as though some old portrait had stepped down off the wall, and she could not yet make herself believe it. "Who?" she said. "Are you?" The man reached up and pulled the rough scarf from his throat, pushed back his hair, and stood straight at last to his full height. He looked at her with cool grey eyes that several people in that hall had reason to know, and the likeness to the portrait of the 5th Duke above. The stare, his brother, was suddenly and horribly plain. It was old Jonas who said it first. The old gardener had been peering, trembling, and now his face broke open like a sunrise. "Master Gabriel," he said, in a cracked whisper that carried to every corner. Then, remembering, fumbling down onto his bad knees, "Your Grace. Oh, Your Grace, you're come. I'd know those eyes in the dark, boy or man. I taught you to bud a rose with those eyes watching." "Yes, Jonas," said the Duke very gently. He crossed the hall and raised the old man up with his own 2 hands before he would say another word to anyone. The sight of it, the great ragged stranger lifting the weeping old servant to his feet like something precious, told Susanna everything. She put her hand to her mouth and felt the floor of her life shift under her. What followed she would never afterward be able to recount in full order, only in pieces, because it came fast and terrible. The Duke turned on the dowager and the steward, and he was not cold but burning, a low-banked fury 20 times more frightening than any shout. He named what he knew. He had been 3 weeks in his own house unseen, and he had read his own books, the real ones and the false, for Lady Cornelia's smuggled warnings had told him where to look, and a man does not need permission to enter rooms he owns. He knew the rents that had been screwed up, and where the difference had gone. He knew the tenants turned off, and the cottages stripped. He knew his great-aunt's letters had been opened and burned, and his own answered with smooth lies in the steward's hand. Susanna held to one corner of the hall and missed nothing, though her knees were water under her. She saw the Duke hold out his hand, not even looking at the steward, and say a single word. The book. She saw Sorrel understand which book he meant. The thin one, the closed one she had glimpsed at his elbow on the rent day. The steward's careful world ended in his face as he understood that the ragged man had found it weeks ago. In a locked press he had believed only he could open. Sorrel did not move to give it, and he did not have to. The Duke named the figures from memory, quietly, page by page. the true rents and the rents written down, the difference, and where it had gone. 3 years of it. 5, 11. The naming itself became a kind of sentence, and the hall was utterly silent, but for that one voice doing the sums. Mr. Pryke went the colour of tallow, and stepped very quietly away from the steward's side and toward the wall, the first rat off the ship. And Susanna understood she was watching a whole order of fear dissolve in the space of a few minutes. It was the fear that had ruled her life, and the lives of everyone below stairs, for years. It dissolved simply because the one man it could not touch had come home and stood up in his own hall. The dowager tried once, and Susanna gave her that much. She had courage of a kind, the courage of the cornered. Veronica gathered her marble face and spoke in a voice pitched to remind the room, and the Duke, of who she was. This was monstrous, she said. She was his brother's widow. She had kept his house 11 years that he had not troubled to enter. Whatever errors his steward had made were the steward's, and not hers, and he would do well to remember she was family before he shamed his own blood before the servants. It was well done, and it might have worked on a softer man. "You kept my house," said the Duke, quite calm now, which was worse than the fury. "Yes, you kept it the way a man keeps a fire he is selling for the brass of the grate. I have walked my own land 3 weeks as a beggar, madam, and I have seen what your keeping made of it. I have seen the Hartleys put on the road in a frost, old men starved of coal, children sent off without bread, and a maid threatened with ruin for the crime of decency. That is your keeping." He let it stand a moment. "You are my brother's widow, and for his sake, and only his, you will not want. But you will never again spend 1 shilling of mine, or break 1 servant, or turn out 1 tenant. Family." He let the word fall the way she had so often let her cruelties fall, pleasantly, with a smile that did not reach the eyes, giving her just once her own coin. "We will speak of family in my lawyer's office, and nowhere else, and never again in this hall." Veronica had ruled Yardwood like a queen, and now she stood in her travelling finery and watched her whole built world come down. Susanna had every reason to hate her, and found she could not look away from her face, because what was in it was so nakedly the thing the dowager had spent 11 years hiding. Terror. Not of the law, for she had been careful, and would likely never see a courtroom, but terror of going back, of being again what she had been before she married the rank, a poor gentleman's portionless daughter with a beautiful useless face, of the small mean lodgings and the cut gowns, and the long humiliating dependence, of being a nobody, which to Veronica was a kind of death she would do anything to outrun, and had. She had not been cruel for the pleasure of it. She had been cruel out of fear all along, the fear of the drowning who pull others under, and seeing it plain, Susanna could not hate her, only pity her, which the dowager would have found more unbearable than hatred had she known. The Duke did not destroy her, and that, too, Susanna saw, and never forgot. He might have. He stripped her of Yardwood, of course. She would leave that day, and not return, her reign over, the good rooms going dark behind her. But he did not turn her out to the nothing she dreaded. Through his lawyers in the days after he settled on her, coldly, a small fixed income, and a small distant house, enough to live retired and decent and never grand again. It was at once a mercy, and the heaviest sentence he could have passed. It gave Veronica exactly the modest obscurity she had married a duke to escape, and it let her live out her years in it, knowing how close she had come to keeping the world she had stolen, and whose simple honesty had finally costed her. She went without thanks, and never forgave the mercy. The cruel are never grateful to be spared. It only shows them, too plainly, what they are. But all that was the days after. In the hall, in the moment, the steward was silenced, and the dowager sent to pack, and old Jonas settled weeping into the best chair by the great hearth, with orders that his cottage was his for life. Then the Duke turned at last, in the wreck and the ringing of it, and looked across the hall for the one face he wanted. He found Susanna where she stood by her packed box, dismissed, without a character, ruined an hour before by his own steward, and the look on his face changed entirely. For Susanna the hall had gone strange and far away. She stood with her small corded box at her feet, the whole of her worldly goods, packed to be turned out at dawn, and around her the order of 11 years was coming apart in a quarter of an hour. She could not make the two facts sit together. The man at the wall, the man in the yard, the man who had taken her bread in the rain and folded his fingers over it and asked her why, was the Duke, and had always been the Duke. Every kindness she had done him, she had done to the master of Yardwood, believing him a beggar. The food from her own plate, the dry corner, the lecture on guilt she went hot to remember. She did not know whether that made her a fool, or whether it was, somehow, the only honest thing that had happened in that hall in years, that one person had treated the Duke as a man, when she thought there was nothing in it for her at all. Beside her, old Jonas wept by the fire, and said Master Gabriel's name over and over, like a man at his prayers. From the stair, Lady Cornelia watched, having had herself wheeled out to see the reckoning. She watched Susanna, not the Duke, with her black eyes bright, and a strange, small smile on her ancient face, as if she had known something a long while, and was only now seeing it proved. Susanna understood none of it. She understood only that the floor of her life had gone, and that by every rule she had ever lived by, she ought to pick up her box and slip out the side door before the great people remembered she was there. She could not make her feet move to do it. He came to her through the staring household. She did not curtsy. She could not move at all. He stopped before her. The ragged coat, the Duke's eyes, the man she had fed in the rain, and sat with in the dark and lectured, God help her, on duty. She did not know in that moment whether to laugh or weep or sink through the floor, and did a little of all three. You knew, she managed. All this time. I gave you my own dinner. I told you to stop enjoying your guilt. Her voice cracked between horror and something dangerously close to laughter. I told a Duke to muck out his soul. You did, and it was the best counsel I have had in 11 years, and I mean to take it, said Gabriel. The corner of his hard mouth moved, the almost of a smile, the first she had seen on him. I have set it right, Susanna. Or I have begun to, as you instructed. That she had been dismissed and ruined an hour before, and was now being smiled at by the master of it all, was more than she could hold standing, and the practical terror reasserted itself over the wonder. Your Grace, she said, stepping back, formal and white. Mr. Sorrel has dismissed me without a character. I must find Jonas and go. I am glad, I am so glad, for the old man, and the tenants, and all of it. But I cannot stay where I have been turned off. It is not right. I must. You are not dismissed, said the Duke. No one in this house but I has the right to dismiss anyone, and I have just dismissed the man who dismissed you. Susanna, stop. Look at me. She looked. I am not going to offer you your place back. The bottom dropped out of her stomach. I am going to offer you a great deal more than that, and I am terrified you will say no, he said. I have thought these 3 weeks how to say this so that it does not sound like what it must sound like, and I have not found a way, so I will say it badly and trust you to hear it true. He drew a breath. The whole hall had gone silent around them, and he did not seem to know the hall was there. When I came home, a stranger to my own house, every soul in it treated me as what I appeared to be, which was nothing, a piece of foreign rubbish the road washed up. You alone treated me as though I were a man. You had nothing to gain by it. You did not know me. You could not be rewarded for it. There was no duke behind the beggar that you could see, and you were kind anyway, at cost to yourself, because that is simply what you are when no one is watching, and there is nothing to be had by it. He paused. Susanna, that is the rarest thing in the world. I have stood in throne rooms and never once seen it, and I had given up believing it was real. I will not, having found the one person who showed me plain human kindness when I was no one, let her walk out of my door to the road because a thief in my pay tore up her character. I am asking you to be my wife. The hall made a sound, a collective indrawn breath, and Susanna heard it as from very far away. She should have said yes at once. Any woman in her position, dismissed and ruined 1 hour and offered a dukedom the next, would have fallen on it. That she did not, that she stood instead with her chin up and her eyes bright and hard, was the third of her decisions, and the one that mattered most, for it told him, more than any kindness had, exactly who she was. No, she said, not like this. The almost smile vanished, and he went very still. Hear me, Your Grace, for I will say at once. Her voice shook but did not fail. I will not be a reward. I fed you in the rain because you were hungry, not to be made a duchess for it. And if you marry me to pay a debt of kindness, then you make my kindness into a coin. I would rather go on the road with my character torn up than have the one free thing I ever did in this house turned into a wage. The tears had come, and she was furious at them. And I will not be a tale, the maid the Duke raised up, the pretty story the county tells over its dinners. I have watched this house make people into things for 11 years, into expenses and conveniences and ornaments, and I will not be made into a thing, not even a flattering one, not even by you. She lifted her chin. If you have come, in 3 weeks of watching me carry coal, to care for me, Susanna, the actual woman, the sharp tongue, and the curate's daughter and all, then court me like a man courts a woman. Slowly. Let me come to know you as you truly are, and not as a beggar or a duke. Let me say yes or no to Gabriel, and not to Yardwood. But I will not be lifted off the floor like a dropped glove, and called fortunate. I have too much, Your Grace, to be fortunate. It is the only thing I have ever had, and I am keeping it. There was a silence in the great hall that no one in it ever forgot. Then the Duke of Yardwood did a thing that scandalized them more than the ragged coat had, and that Lady Cornelia, watching from the stair, pronounced afterward the only sensible thing the boy had ever done. He bowed to the dismissed housemaid, a full bow, grave and entire, the bow one gentleman makes to another, whom he has wronged and respects. You are right, and I beg your pardon, he said. I have spent 11 years among people who could be bought, until I had near forgotten there was any other kind, and I have just done the very thing I crossed the world to stop. I tried to settle a person's worth in a single careless stroke, as if a wage could answer a soul. Forgive me. I withdraw the offer. He straightened, and the grey eyes were not cold now at all. And I make a smaller one, which I hope you will find harder to refuse. Stay, not as a maid. That is finished, and you will never carry coal in this house again. Stay as my great-aunt's companion, in her own rooms, at a proper wage, free to leave the day it does not suit you. And let me, as you say, court you like a man, slowly, and earn what I tried just now to seize. That is all. The choice is yours, and it is a real one, and there is no duke standing behind it that you must say yes to. There is only Gabriel, who was hungry once at your door, asking whether he may try. Susanna, the curate's daughter, had kept her soul her own through 8 years of a hard house, by never once letting them take her freedom to choose. She looked at the man before her, and found that she was free still, that he had given her freedom back into her own hands, with that withdrawn offer, as no gift of rank could ever have done, and that, being free, she knew her own mind. Yes, she said, you may try. Gabriel. It was the first time she had said his name, knowing whose it was. She gave it to him on purpose, plainly, the name she had used freely, to a beggar offered now as freely to a duke. It was the same man, and she had chosen him as the same man. He heard all of that in it, and the almost smile became, at last, a whole one. She had not known, until she said it, how much she had needed him to give the name back to her on those terms. A duke could have ordered her to wife, and called it honour. A duke could have raised her up, and called it kindness, and she would have been a curiosity to the end of her days. The Maid yard would made a duchess, a story told over other people's tables. What he had done instead, by withdrawing the grand offer and standing there in his ruined coat, asking only leave to try, was hand her back the one thing the house had spent 8 years trying to take, her own free choosing. He had made himself, for that moment, no one she had to say yes to. And so her yes, when it came, was the truest thing she owned. It was given to a man, and not a rank, on her own 2 feet, in a hall full of people who had thought her invisible an hour before. He courted her slowly, as she had bid him, all that winter and into the spring, and it was the talk of 3 counties, and Susanna did not care a straw for the talk. He did not raise her up. He came down into the long ordinary evenings in Lady Cornelia's warm rooms, and let her know him as he was, the grief and the guilt and the dry, deep kindness under the hard-used surface. It had not been easy, and she would not have respected it if it had. The first evening he came to Lady Cornelia's rooms as himself, she did not know where to look or how to be. He was in a good coat, his beard gone, his hair cut, a duke's signet on his hand. The easy companionship of the garden wall and the dark yard seemed suddenly to have happened to 2 different people. She stood by the fire, stiff as a stranger, and called him Your Grace. He bore it for a quarter of an hour, then said quietly that he liked it no better than she did. Would she sit? Would she tell him, as she would have told the man at the wall, what she thought of the new under-steward he was minded to take on? He valued her judgment, and had no one else at Yardwood whose judgment he valued at all. It was a real question about a real thing, and she did have an opinion, so she forgot to be a duchess-in-waiting, and became Susanna again, and told him plainly the man drank, and the tenants knew it. The evening turned, and they were themselves once more. That was how he courted her in the end, not with the rank but around it. He asked her the questions no one had asked her in her life, what she thought and what she would do, and whether he was right, and he listened to the answers as though they weighed something. Little by little the strangeness wore off, and what was left underneath was the thing that had been there in the dark yard all along. Lady Cornelia sat through these evenings like a small, fierce chaperone, with her knitting and her opinions. The boy had finally shown a scrap of sense, she pronounced, more than once. And Susanna was to stop fretting about what 3 counties would say, since 3 counties had never once gone hungry on her behalf, and might therefore keep their views. There were hard hours. Susanna lay awake on more than one night, certain she was a fool, that no good could come of a duke and a housemaid, that she would be a curiosity and a scandal and a weight on him. But every time she had nearly talked herself out of it, she would see him again, with old Jonas, or with a frightened tenant come up with a grievance, treating each of them as though they mattered exactly as much as a lord. And she would understand that this was simply how he was made too, the same way she was made. She had not, after all, fallen in love with the Duke. She had fallen in love with the one other person she had ever met who could not stop being kind to people, who could do nothing for him. And rank had nothing to do with that, and never would. By the time he asked her again, there was no rank in the question at all, only Gabriel and Susanna, and she said yes the second time, the way the first time had deserved, gladly and freely, and on her own 2 feet. They were married in the spring, in the small church on the estate, and the tenants who came were the Duke's own restored people, the rents put right, the turned-off families sought out and brought home where they could be found, the books made clean. The Hartleys were found. It was Susanna who would not let that thread lie, remembering a frozen baby in the still room, and a family on the London road, and an hour she had given when she could not give a life. She set the new men to searching until the family was traced, the man labouring at a brick field 2 counties off, the children thin but living. The youngest, the one who had been blue with cold at the kitchen door, had grown into a solemn, watchful little girl, who did not remember the worst night of her life, and whose parents prayed she never would. They were brought home in the early summer to their own holding, the rent set at what the land could truly bear. On the day they came, Susanna walked down to the farm herself. Not as a duchess, come to be thanked, but because she had carried the not-knowing half a year, and could not rest until she had seen the child safe with her own eyes. The mother knew her at once. There was a long moment in the farmyard when neither woman could speak at all, the maid who was now a duchess, and the wife who had stood begging at a door. And then the mother simply took Susanna's hands in her 2 work-roughened ones, and held them. That was the whole of what passed between them, and it was more than any speech. It was the only wedding gift Susanna had wanted, and she had given it to herself. There was a cost, and the Duke carried it all his days, and never pretended otherwise. 11 years he had let his grief excuse his absence, and tenants had suffered, and an old aunt had been robbed, and a faithful old man had come near to being turned out to die, and no later kindness gave back the years the bad stewardship had eaten. He knew it. He let it drive him, gently, to be the kind of master his father had been, and his absence had not. And Susanna, who had no patience for a man enjoying his guilt, saw to it that he spent it on the work, and not on himself. The house itself seemed to change with the season. Below stairs the fear went out of it first. The fires were lit when they should be, and kept in. The candles were wax, and not counted to the stub, and the servants ate enough. Mr. Pryke was gone, turned off the same week as his master, the steward, and the new housekeeper was a fair woman who did not deal in pleasant little cruelties. The maids stopped flinching when a bell rang. The young ones laughed again in the scullery, which no one at Yardwood had heard in years. Word of it spread out across the estate as well. Tenants who had learned to dread the sight of the office began to come up without that grey look, and the new man, set over the rents, was one who balanced his books in a single honest column. Susanna noticed the change, the way you notice a fever break in a sick room. The great rooms were opened and aired and lived in rather than kept dark for show, and the long cold dinner table, which had stretched the length of the hall under the dowager, was shortened at the Duchess's quiet request to something two people could talk across. It was a small thing. It was also the truest measure of what had changed, that the house had stopped being a thing to be displayed and become, at last, a place where people were warm. Old Jonas was too stiff now to garden, but he sat in the sun by the cottage that was his for life, and directed a pack of young under-gardeners in the resurrection of his roses, with the happy tyranny of the very old. He lived to see the first of them bloom again, and to see Susanna, Duchess of Yardwood, come out in the early mornings, as she always would, to talk with him among the beds. Lady Cornelia, vindicated and avenged and warm at last, lasted 2 more contented years, and died with her hand in Susanna's, calling her, at the end, the only sensible woman the family had ever had the wit to take in. And Veronica lived out her small fixed years in her small distant house, never grand again, which was the whole of the justice she met, and was, those who knew the truth, agreed exactly enough. Sometimes, on a winter night, the Duke and Duchess of Yardwood would stand together at the lit windows of the warm house and look down at the kitchen door. It was the door where a starving stranger had once been turned away into the dark, with the bread thrown to the dogs. And it was where one maid alone had crossed the streaming yard to put food into his hands, and ask no reason but that he was hungry. They had given an order the first week of their marriage, that no soul should ever again be turned from that door cold or unfed, gentle or ragged, known or stranger, and the order held all their lives and after. The whole of their happiness, the Duke would say, had walked in through that despised door in the person of a wet beggar nobody troubled to see, and had been saved by the one person who troubled to see him. For a house is known, in the end, not by the grandeur it shows the people it thinks important, but by the kindness it shows the people it thinks are no one at all. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.